Well, hello again, sports fans. This is my new Wing Z84 flying wing. I'm hoping to set it up as a long-range FPV plane. Well, long range for me is around about 10 kilometres. And I've fitted it with a F2S Flight Controller from Banggood, which I hope will do the heavy lifting for me. In my earlier wings I've been using a Big AL BGL6G AP autopilot, but I've been attracted to the F2S by the fact that it has digital servo gain controls and an integrated OSD. The Z84 is still not fully trimmed. I think it's a little bit tail heavy, but I've got it to the point where it seems to be relatively stable in flight, and I thought I'd test out some of the function of the F2S Flight Controller. These are the settings I'm currently using. I originally started with higher aileron and elevator gains, but it was a little bit erratic, and I've trimmed it down to this level at the moment, which seems to be working okay. My only real concerns so far are with the altitude reading, which I've highlighted in yellow on the right hand side of the screen. So I'm sitting on the ground in the home position, and as you can see the altitude is climbing. I'm not sure whether this is normal or not, but as I walk it out to the field, which is actually slightly lower than the home position, you can see that the altitude rises and then drops down. I've found that it's easiest for me to launch by myself in balance mode, which is what I do here. And she goes off quite nicely, and I set about gaining some altitude, and the altitude reading seems to be within the range that I'd expect it to be, and I've indicated that with a green box around the readout. It doesn't take very long though before the altitude figure starts dropping dramatically on the OSD, though the plane still seems to be maintaining a reasonable altitude, and then it seems to come good again, and I continue to climb. I decided to slip it into return to home just to see if that helps, and it immediately starts dropping the altitude again on the display, though once again the plane seems to be maintaining a level attitude. And then again it suddenly comes good. So I'll leave it in return home and let it continue to do circuits about the home point, and keep an eye on it just to see if it is maintaining altitude or not. Unfortunately it's a bit windy today, so it's a bit hard to tell whether the Z84 is actually maintaining a constant altitude or not. One thing though seems certain, it's certainly not climbing to the 100 metres that I've got set as the home altitude in the menu. So it's not long before it starts to lose altitude on the reading again, and it goes down quite quickly and dramatically and stays down for some time. Once again the plane seems to be maintaining roughly the same altitude, and when the OSD comes good it seems to bring it back up to roughly the same altitude it was on before it went down. So once it's stabilised, I decided to switch it into heading and altitude hold mode to see how it behaves there. One of the things I like about the F2S OSD is that it gives you an indication when you're in heading and altitude mode that you're adding stick inputs. There are little bars on the end of the arrows that disappear when you're using the sticks. So as you can see here, both the sticks are released, so I've got bars on the end of each arrow. But when I add in elevator, the top and bottom bar disappears, and when I add in aileron, the left and right bars disappear. So the altimeter seems to be operating okay at this point. As I add in elevator, you can see that the bars on the arrows have disappeared and the altitude climbing on the altimeter display. So hunky-dory at the moment. So I decided to test the heading altitude mode, and for the next 4 or 5 minutes everything goes quite smoothly, so I've just speeded this section of the video up. I've just been doing long straight runs in various directions around the field and adding minor course and altitude corrections which are being reflected in the mode icon as I mentioned earlier on. So at this point in the flight I'm pretty happy. Everything seems to be working as it should. The video is giving a reasonably good picture all round. I haven't had any significant dropouts. The Z84 is being buffeted around a bit by the wind, but I don't think that's any fault of the flight controller. It is quite gusty. So I decided to test return to home mode from about 1 kilometre out heading away and flick the switch. She turns around quite nicely and heads back almost pretty well directly. Once she gets home she seems to drop down to the 100 metres altitude that I've set for home, so that seems to be working at the moment. Unfortunately it doesn't take long for that altimeter to start dropping down into the minuses again. And I must admit I'm pretty disappointed at this point. I thought it might have just been a momentary glitch at the beginning, but here she is back again, the same problem. I'm noticing that the telemetry data on the bottom half of the screen is also flashing intermittently, and I'm starting to wonder if this is a power problem somehow. Anyhow, it seems to come good again after a little while, so I carry on. I decided to slip it into heading altitude mode and head out to the west a little bit, and then test out the balance mode at a reasonably safe altitude. Once again it seems to be functioning fine. The altitude's being maintained reasonably level and the wings are level, so I just have a bit of a fly round, and I'll speed up this section of the video because nothing particularly interesting happens. I'll slip it back into heading altitude mode just to have a bit of a play with the arrows and the sticks, but everything, as I said, is continuing to go okay. I decided to do another return to home test from about 2 kilometres out heading away, and she turns around nicely and lines up on our field quite well. There's a little bit of sideways movement, but not anything that would be cause for concern. She seems to be coming down gradually to the 100 metres home altitude, so that's a good thing. So I slip it back into heading altitude hold mode and notice that she is actually having a bit of trouble maintaining a level attitude, and I think this is due to the fact that the lithium ion pack I'm using is down to 9 volts, so the RPM is significantly down. This is my first lithium ion pack, so I'm interested to see how far it will go, so I just up the throttle a bit and keep on doing circuits and eventually put it in the return to home mode again to monitor what's going on. So I figure 20 minutes is probably a long enough flight, and slip it back into balance mode to bring it in for a landing. As you can see, the altimeter immediately starts playing up. So I decide I'll just set up for landing anyway. I'll leave it in balance mode. This will be the first landing I've attempted in balance mode, so I'll be interested to see how it goes. It's pretty frustrating as I'm relatively certain I'm not 50 metres underground at this point in the flight. But just before I set up for the final approach, it seems to come good, or at least not as bad. So what the hell is going on, I just don't know. So I bring it in fairly low to the ground and cut the power, and as soon as I do, the nose goes up and she stalls and drops to the ground like a stone. So it doesn't look like balance mode is the way to go. And once again, the altimeter seems to sort itself on the way back to the pits without any influence on my part. So I've got no idea what's going on. Needless to say, it's pretty frustrating. I've had a look at the few videos I can find on RC groups with people that have been using these flight controllers, and it doesn't seem to be an issue for them. So I'll check my wiring and layout, and I'll also post this on the RC Groups forum and see if anyone else has experienced a similar problem and how they got around it. Anyway, hopefully it won't be an issue for the next flight.